June 6, 1944. 0710 hours. Pointe du Hoc, Normandy coast. The channel water churns black and cold beneath a sky choked with smoke. Sergeant William Big Bill Petty braces himself in the pitching landing craft, one hand gripping the rail, the other clutching a coil of knotted rope that smells of tar and salt. Around him, 89 other men of the 2nd Ranger Battalion hunch against the spray, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the limestone cliff rising ahead like a fortress wall. The cliff is 90 feet high, straight up, and somewhere on top, German gunners wait with machine guns, mortars, and a clear line of fire down to the beach. Petty's rope, a crude, improvised thing he'd designed himself during training in Scotland, is soaked through, heavy as iron. His commanding officer had called it crazy. A British liaison officer had laughed. But now, as the landing craft lurches toward the shore and the first German shells begin to scream overhead, that rope is all they have. This is not a story about strategy. It is not about grand plans drawn in London war rooms or bombing campaigns coordinated across continents. This is a story about a single idea, born in the mind of a sergeant who refused to believe that the impossible was truly impossible. It is a story about 90 men who climbed a cliff under fire, using a piece of equipment that should not have worked, to achieve an objective that every expert said could not be done. And it is a story about how, in the chaos of D-Day, one man's stubborn ingenuity changed the course of the largest amphibious invasion in history. Pointe du Hoc is not just a cliff. It is a dagger aimed at the heart of Operation Overlord. Perched between Utah and Omaha beaches, this jagged promontory juts into the English Channel, commanding a view of both American landing zones. German intelligence has fortified it with 6 155mm coastal guns, each capable of hurling shells 12 miles out to sea. If those guns remain operational on the morning of June 6th, they can tear apart the invasion fleet, rip holes in landing craft, and slaughter thousands of men before they ever reach the sand. Allied planners know this. They know that Pointe du Hoc must be neutralized, and they know that the only way to do it is to send men, Rangers, America's elite assault troops, straight up that cliff in the first wave of the invasion. The mission falls to Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder and the 2nd Ranger Battalion. Rudder is a Texan, quiet and methodical, with a reputation for leading from the front. He has trained his men for months in England and Scotland, drilling them on cliff assaults, rope climbing, and close-quarters combat. But from the beginning, the mission has been plagued by a single unsolvable problem. How do you get men up a sheer cliff face under enemy fire? The British have lent the Rangers specialized scaling equipment, rocket-propelled grappling hooks, extension ladders borrowed from the London Fire Brigade, even a Duke KW amphibious truck fitted with a 100-foot ladder. But all of this equipment is untested in combat. All of it is vulnerable, and none of it addresses the fundamental challenge of getting a rope to the top of the cliff in the first place. Enter Sergeant William Petty. Petty is not an officer. He is not a tactician or an engineer. He is a 32-year-old former factory worker from New Jersey, broad-shouldered and blunt-spoken, with a habit of tinkering with things that do not work. During training in Scotland, he watches the Rangers practice with the British scaling equipment and immediately sees the flaw. The rocket-propelled grappling hooks are supposed to carry ropes to the top of the cliff, but the rockets are unreliable. They misfire. They fall short. Worse, the ropes are too thin and smooth. When wet, they become slick, almost impossible to grip. Men lose their footing. They slide down. And in combat, under fire, that kind of failure means death. Petty begins experimenting. He takes standard climbing rope, thick, hemp-braided rope used by sailors and dock workers, and ties knots into it at regular intervals, each knot the size of a man's fist. The knots serve two purposes. They give the climber something to grip, and they prevent the hands from sliding down the rope even when it is soaked. He tests the rope himself, climbing cliffs along the Scottish coast in the rain, adjusting the spacing of the knots, the thickness of the rope, the weight of the grappling hook. He shows it to other sergeants. He shows it to Lieutenant Colonel Rudder. Some think it is brilliant, Others think it is suicide. Petty does not care. He knows it will work. But the British liaison officers are skeptical. They have spent weeks coordinating the delivery of the rocket launchers, the extension ladders, the specialized equipment that is supposed to make the Pointe du Hoc assault possible. They do not want some American sergeant undermining their plans with a homemade rope ladder. There are arguments. There are meetings. Petty characteristically ignores them. He orders his squad to prepare the ropes themselves, knotting them by hand, waterproofing them with tar, attaching grappling hooks forged in a local blacksmith shop. By the time the Rangers board their transports for the invasion, every man in Petty's company carries one of his knotted ropes coiled over his shoulder. The Rangers expected a surgical strike. They expected to land at the base of the cliff at 0630 hours, scale the heights in 15 minutes, and destroy the German guns before the enemy could react. They expected speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. They expected a textbook operation. They did not expect the navigation error. The 10 landing craft carrying the Rangers are supposed to make landfall directly beneath Pointe du Hoc. Instead, the lead coxswain misreads the coastline in the pre-dawn darkness and steers the flotilla east, toward Pointe de la Percée, a similar-looking cliff 3 miles away. By the time Lieutenant Colonel Rudder realizes the mistake, precious minutes have been lost. He orders the landing craft to turn west, but now they are fighting the current, the tide, and the wind. German shore batteries have spotted them. Shells begin to fall. One landing craft takes a direct hit and sinks, taking 12 Rangers with it. Another is swamped by a wave and capsizes. The men cling to debris, watching their equipment, rocket launchers, ladders, ammunition, sink into the channel. By the time the surviving craft reach Pointe du Hoc, it is 0710 hours, 40 minutes late. The element of surprise is gone. The Germans are waiting. The cliff face is a nightmare. Limestone pockmarked by RAF bombs, honeycombed with craters and ledges. Smoke from the naval bombardment still clings to the rock, thick as fog. At the top, German soldiers peer over the edge, silhouettes against the sky. They have machine guns. They have grenades. And they have orders to hold the position at all costs. The landing craft ground onto the narrow beach. The ramps drop, and Sergeant Petty is the first man off. He does not run. He does not shout. He moves with the deliberate calm of a man who has done this 100 times in training, even though he has never done it under fire. He unslings the coil of rope from his shoulder, fixes the grappling hook, and begins to swing it in a wide arc. Around him, other Rangers are doing the same. Some are using the rocket launchers, firing grappling hooks toward the cliff top. But the ropes are wet from the crossing. The launchers misfire. The hooks fall short, clattering back down the rocks. Petty's rope is different. He releases the grappling hook with a sharp, practiced motion. It sails upward, trailing the thick, knotted rope behind it, and catches on a jutting ledge near the top of the cliff. He yanks hard, testing it. The rope holds. He turns to the men behind him, soaked, scared, young faces streaked with salt water and vomit, and he says 3 words, "Follow me up," and he begins to climb. The climb is 70 feet. In training, on a dry cliff with no one shooting at you, it takes 90 seconds. But this is not training. Petty's hands close around the first knot, and he hauls himself upward, boots scrabbling for purchase on the slick limestone. Above him, the crack of rifle fire. A burst of machine gun rounds stitches the rock face inches from his head, showering him with stone chips. He does not stop. He reaches for the next knot. Pulls, climbs. The rope sways under his weight, swinging him out over the drop. Below, the beach is a chaos of smoke and bodies and burning landing craft. He does not look down. Behind him, other Rangers are on the rope. Private First Class Harry Fate, a kid from Iowa, grips the knots with white-knuckled hands and climbs, eyes fixed on Petty's boots above him. Corporal Leo Lomel, a former coal miner from New York, follows close behind, his Thompson submachine gun slung across his back. The Germans are throwing grenades now, black shapes tumbling down the cliff face. One explodes 20 feet to the left. Another lands on a ledge and detonates, the blast echoing off the rock. The rope shudders but holds. Petty is halfway up when he hears the shout from above. A German soldier leans over the edge, knife in hand, sawing at the rope. Petty does not hesitate. He draws his pistol with one hand, still gripping the rope with the other, and fires 3 shots. The German jerks backward and disappears. Petty holsters the pistol, grabs the next knot and keeps climbing. 60 feet. 70. 80. His arms are burning. His lungs are raw. But the top of the cliff is close now. Close enough to see the scarred earth, the barbed wire, the edge of a concrete bunker. He reaches for the last knot, hauls himself over the rim, and rolls onto the plateau. For half a second he lies flat, gasping, rain and sweat dripping into his eyes. Then he is on his feet, rifle up, scanning for targets. The plateau is a moonscape, cratered by bombs, littered with shattered trees and twisted metal. Smoke everywhere. And Germans. They come at him from the left, 2 soldiers with rifles. Petty fires. 1 drops. The other dives behind a bunker. More Rangers are cresting the cliff now. Fate, Lommel, a dozen others, fanning out across the plateau, moving fast, moving aggressive. They have trained for this. They know the layout of the fortifications from aerial photographs. They know where the gun emplacements are supposed to be. They move toward them like wolves. But when they reach the positions, they find nothing. The concrete bunkers are empty. The 6 150mm guns, the reason for this entire mission, the weapons that were supposed to devastate the invasion fleet, are gone. In their place, telephone poles painted gray, propped up to look like gun barrels from the air. The Germans have moved the real guns inland, hidden them in hedgerows and orchards, camouflaged against air reconnaissance. The Rangers have climbed the cliff, fought their way to the top, and accomplished their primary objective, only to discover that the objective does not exist. In any other unit, this might have been the end. The mission failed. The gun's gone. But the Rangers are not any other unit. Sergeant Lommel and Staff Sergeant Jack Kuhn do not stop. They move inland, away from the cliff, pushing through hedgerows and shell craters, searching. They know the guns are out here somewhere. German artillery observers would not have moved them far. They need to maintain line of sight to the beaches. Lommel and Kuhn move quietly, rifles ready, scanning the fields. And then, a quarter-mile south of the cliff, they find them. The 6 155mm guns lined up in a hedgerow, covered with camouflage netting. Unguarded. Ready to fire. The Germans have not yet brought up ammunition. The guns are loaded, but the crews are elsewhere, perhaps pulling back from the bombardment, perhaps unaware that the Rangers have already reached the plateau. Lommel and Kuhn do not waste time. They pull thermite grenades from their belts, shove them into the breeches of the guns, and detonate them. The thermite burns white-hot, melting the firing mechanisms, warping the barrels. 1 gun, 2, 3. By the time they are finished, all 6 guns are destroyed. The mission, the real mission, is complete. But completing the mission is not the same as surviving it. The Rangers on Pointe du Hoc are now trapped. They hold the cliff, but they are surrounded. German reinforcements are moving in from the south and east. Infantry companies supported by mortars and machine guns. The Rangers dig in, using shell craters as foxholes, setting up defensive positions along the perimeter of the plateau. They have ammunition, but not much. They have no heavy weapons, and they have no way to evacuate. The plan had been for the 116th Infantry Regiment to push inland from Omaha Beach and link up with the Rangers by noon. But Omaha Beach has become a slaughterhouse. The 116th is pinned down, unable to advance. The Rangers are on their own. For 2 days, they hold German infantry attack from the south. The Rangers beat them back. German snipers infiltrate the perimeter. The Rangers hunt them down. Mortar shells rain down constantly, turning the plateau into a hellscape of smoke and fire. Men die in their foxholes. Men die crawling toward the aid station. Sergeant Petty moves among them, calm and steady, distributing ammunition, repositioning machine guns, dragging wounded men to cover. His knotted rope, the rope that got them up the cliff, now lies discarded at the base of the cliff, trampled and forgotten. But the idea behind it, the belief that the impossible can be made possible, is what keeps the Rangers fighting. By the morning of June 8th, when elements of the 116th Infantry finally break through and relieve the Rangers, only 90 men are still combat effective. Of the original 225 Rangers who began the assault, 135 are dead or wounded. But they have held Pointe du Hoc. They have destroyed the guns. And they have done it because one sergeant refused to accept that the cliff could not be climbed. There is a photograph, taken weeks after the battle, that shows the base of the cliff at Pointe du Hoc. In the foreground, a section of Sergeant Petty's knotted rope lies coiled on the rocks, still attached to a rusted grappling hook. The rope is frayed, darkened by salt water and blood, the knots worn smooth by the hands of dozens of men. In the background, the cliff rises, scarred and pitted, littered with the debris of war, spent shell casings, scraps of webbing, a broken ladder. The photograph is labeled simply, Ranger Equipment, D-Day. It is an unremarkable image, and yet it tells a story that no official report can fully capture. Because the rope is not just a piece of equipment, it is a symbol of something larger, something that the Germans, for all their tactical brilliance and ideological fervor, could never fully understand. It is a symbol of American ingenuity, the belief that problems can be solved not by following orders, but by thinking differently. It is a symbol of trust, the willingness of 90 men to follow a sergeant up a cliff under fire because they believed in his idea. And it is a symbol of resilience, the refusal to accept defeat even when the mission seems impossible. The German soldiers defending Pointe du Hoc had expected the Rangers to use the rocket launchers, the extension ladders, the sophisticated equipment that Allied intelligence had prepared. They had trained to counter that equipment. They had positioned machine guns to cover the likely scaling routes. They had stockpiled grenades to drop on climbers using metal ladders. They had not expected a rope. And so, when Sergeant Petty threw his grappling hook to the top of the cliff and began to climb, the Germans hesitated, just for a moment, just long enough for the Rangers to gain the cliff top. That hesitation, born from surprise, from the violation of their expectations, was the crack in the fortress, and the Rangers poured through it. There is a deeper truth here, one that resonates far beyond the cliffs of Normandy. The totalitarian mind is a rigid thing. It is built on certainty, on the belief that plans once made must be followed without deviation. It values order, hierarchy, control. It trains its soldiers to execute doctrine, to respond to threats in predetermined ways. And for much of the war, this rigidity served the Wehrmacht well. German infantry tactics were precise and devastating. German armor doctrine was revolutionary. German defensive fortifications were engineering marvels. But rigidity is also a weakness, because when something unexpected happens, when the plan breaks down, when the enemy does something that does not fit the doctrine, the rigid mind struggles to adapt. The Americans, by contrast, are chaos. They are improvisers, tinkerers, problem solvers, who distrust doctrine and question authority. They are factory workers and farmers and mechanics, men who spent their civilian lives figuring out how to make broken things work. They are not trained to follow orders blindly. They are trained to think. And in combat, when the plan falls apart, as it always does, that ability to think, to adapt, to improvise is the difference between victory and defeat. Sergeant Petty's rope is the embodiment of this philosophy. It is not elegant. It is not approved by high command. It is not part of the official plan. But it works. And in the end, that is all that matters. After the war, Sergeant William Petty returns to New Jersey. He goes back to the factory, back to his quiet life, back to tinkering with things in his garage. He does not talk much about Pointe du Hoc. He does not write memoirs or give interviews. When reporters track him down in the 1960s hoping to hear about the rope, he shrugs and says, "It was just common sense. Wet rope is slippery. Knots fix that, but common sense is not common. Not in war, not in any human endeavor. The ability to see a problem clearly, to strip away the complexity and the fear and the doctrine, and to devise a solution that works. That is a rare gift. And on June 6, 1944, that gift saved 90 lives and changed the course of history. The Germans never saw it coming. They could not have seen it coming. Because they were looking for rockets and ladders and mechanized precision. They were looking for the kind of assault that fit their understanding of how war should be fought. They were not looking for a rope. And so, in the gray dawn of D-Day, while the greatest armada in history stormed the beaches of Normandy, while battleships pounded the coastline and bombers darkened the sky, a sergeant from New Jersey climbed a cliff with a piece of knotted hemp and proved that sometimes the simplest ideas are the most powerful. The cliff still stands today, a monument to the men who scaled it. Visitors walk the scarred plateau, peer into the bunkers, and marvel at the sheer audacity of the assault. They see the craters, the twisted metal, the rusted remnants of war. And sometimes, if they look closely, they see a length of old rope, preserved in a museum case, the knots still visible, the fibers still strong after 80 years. It is not much to look at. Just a rope. But it was enough. Enough to carry 90 men up a cliff. Enough to destroy 6 guns. Enough to hold a piece of ground for 2 days against overwhelming odds. Enough to prove that courage and ingenuity can triumph over doctrine and despair. And that, in the end, is the true lesson of Pointe du Hoc. Not that the Americans were stronger than the Germans, or braver or better equipped, but that they were willing to try something that should not have worked. That they were willing to trust a sergeant with a crazy idea. That they were willing to climb. The rope is the symbol, but the climb is the truth. And the truth is this: freedom does not scale cliffs with rockets and ladders. Freedom scales cliffs with knots tied by hand, with faith in the man ahead of you, with the stubborn belief that the impossible is just another problem waiting to be solved. The Germans never saw it coming, but they should have. Because that rope, knotted, tarred, worn smooth by the hands of heroes, was not just a piece of equipment, it was America.